Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. Good morning. It's nice to be back. Well, I shouldn't say it's nice to be back, really. It's beautiful to be back, but it's like the session has not ended. I returned home at around noon yesterday. Nikki's under the weather, and so right away it's clear I need to dive right in. All I want to do is lay down and sleep, but no. Carson needed to go out for a 5-kilometer hike, and Maggie needed to go to play rehearsal and then to an overnight, and the collection of insects in the zendo that had built up while I was away was unforgivable. So I've been busy, and then this morning I wanted to let Nikki rest, so Carson needed to go out again. So it's been go, and then this afternoon I have commitments right after Zazen. So I was actually debating with myself after getting back with Carson, with Kendo already in the driveway, and the Zennies are coming. God, do I have time for a shower? And then I looked at considered my schedule for the next couple of days and thought, well, the next chance is sometime Tuesday. So, yeah, I'll do it right now. And coming home from sesshin, you're usually a little bit raw, so I will admit to not doing all of these things with the most joyous heart. Damn, Zenny's coming. But I can honestly say that sitting down and having all of you coming here and settling in my home Sangha, as soon as that first tone was sounded on the bell, it was like a toilet flushed. And all of the sort of anger or upset or sort of like poor me just kind of like flushed. And I was just filled with a real gratitude to be home and with my home Sangha and all of you. It's I can't tell. It's a beautiful practice that we've got here. And the sound here, after a week in Seattle, and Choboji is right in the path of one of the runways of SeaTac, so it's like there's like until it becomes sort of like you don't notice it anymore. But when it stops, boy, you sure notice it. Living here, I find that when I go there, I have to wear earplugs at night to sleep, but it makes hearing my alarm in the morning really difficult as well. So I'm always really grateful, and especially I wanted to just acknowledge and say thank you to all of you, because you support me, not just with your practice, but with your resources as well. I am paid to be your abbot. You support my livelihood, the food that I eat, the place that I live, and my ongoing training as a priest, as a Zen student, and as a Zen teacher. You make it possible for me to go and train with Genjo Osho, and I wouldn't be able to do it without you. So I'm just very grateful, particularly right now, coming home from a wonderful sesshin Seizan was there with me. And I'm just very grateful for your support. So I just want to say thank you, first of all. Okay, now I can start talking. Today is October 4th. And in the Rinzai tradition, October 5th is a very special memorial day. It's called Darumaki, or Bodhidharma Day. And that's why we've got Bodhidharma up here on this side, so if you're walking around. I always love this picture, this calligraphy that was done by Shinzan Miyame Roshi. I've always been a big fan of Bodhidharma, and so one year he was in town, and he's quite a well-known calligrapher. So I asked him if he'd do a Bodhidharma. So he did. And I love it because it's such the characters above his head say, no knowing. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But first, part of the reason that I love it is because it has a real Western appeal to me, because it looks to me almost like a Matt Groening, like I could see him in The Simpsons, this particular Bodhidharma. So I love him. Whenever it comes up, whenever Bodhidharma Day comes up, I always sort of, I'm walking straight ahead and I'm just going like, I don't need to make a big deal because people know all about Bodhidharma if they're practicing Zen. But more and more I realize that there are new people coming in all the time, and it's always useful to sort of talk about these old, our ancestors. So Bodhidharma is a semi-legendary character. There are people who say absolutely Bodhidharma was a real person. And there are people who say absolutely Bodhidharma is a total myth. And there are people that say Bodhidharma is a conglomeration of 3 or more different teachers that all existed around the same time or in succession to one another. His name itself means Bodhi is like awakening, and Dharma is the Dharma, the law or the teaching. So it's kind of it would be, if it was totally fictitious, it would be a great name for a totally fictitious character that was a legendary Dharma teacher. But the story is that he came from southern India to China in about 475 of the Common Era. Buddhism had already come into China earlier, several hundred years earlier, three or even 400 years earlier. And the form of practice in China was both devotional as well as very sort of scriptural, intellectual. Already temples had been built. It had started to transition from being an exclusively sort of Indian tradition, being more and more modified and updated and integrated into Chinese culture. Certainly wasn't complete. And in a lot of ways, I think the story of Bodhidharma is very important and instructive because in the West, we tend to think of ourselves as super awesome at everything, and faster and better and stronger at everything than everyone else. And so we look at our grasp of Buddhism and the teachings of Buddhism and living the Dharma, and we kind of think, yeah, we got this. And we have lots of conversations and conferences about Western Buddhism. Historically, in Buddhism, most countries that received Buddhism received it from a single direction. So in China, Buddhism, of course, was received from India. And in Vietnam and Korea and Japan, it received Buddhism through China 600 years later. And in Sri Lanka and Thailand, these were missionaries that were sent from India, one direction. And it's only in the West in the past 100 years with technology and travel and gas engines and all that kind of stuff that what we have is the West being approached with Buddhism from multiple different directions. And if we think of the teachings of Buddhism as sort of like a game of telephone that, somebody whispered in India 2,500 years ago and has been whispered through different languages and different cultures and different philosophical contexts and different everything, and has been mingled around in those countries for several hundred years, and then finally we get multiple telephones coming into North America and the West from all these different channels, and they all use this word Buddhism. And so when somebody in the West says, well, what is Buddhism? They're often really confused because they get a whole bunch of really different answers. And I think it's important to really acknowledge that as far as the integration of the Dharma goes in the West, we're babies. We're really, really babies. And there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of years, I think, of chewing on this meal before anything really, really sinks into our culture. There's going to be lots of experiments and lots of failures. And this project that we're engaged in, Zenwest Buddhist Society together, is one of those experiments. So far, I'm pretty happy with how it's going, but it's an experiment, and I can admit and acknowledge that. The story of Bodhidharma is I think, instructive about our approach to practice, specifically in the Zen school. As I was saying, in China at the time that Bodhidharma arrived, Buddhism was already established. In fact, there had already been persecutions of Buddhism. Every couple hundred years in the history of Buddhism, as it traveled, there would be an uprising of sort of xenophobic sentiment in the countries that it came through. It happened in Japan and it happened in China, where the indigenous people, the ruling class, would, at first when it comes in, they would be delighted by this new flavor, by this new perspective and this new aspect. And then a different ruler would come along who would say, our traditional philosophy and religion is this. And we have to remember that Buddhism is an Indian religion. It's a foreign thing. And it's really, our young people are going to the monasteries and they're practicing celibacy, which is bad for the population and all this kind of stuff. And so monasteries would be burned and people would be turned out and monks would be murdered and around it would go. In fact, arguably, this is happening in China to this day. And then another ruler would come in and say, Buddhism's really cool. And they would fund all kinds of sutra translations because they didn't have printing presses back then. So the story goes that when Bodhidharma came to China, Buddhism was already happening. Monasteries had been built. Sutras had been being translated from Sanskrit or Pali into Chinese on large scale. And at the time of Bodhidharma, the emperor of southern China was Wu, who was a huge benefactor of Buddhism. And he ordered the translations of innumerable sutras and supported many monasteries and was really a real patron. In fact, I was reading about him, and he was quite a character because he built this monastery sort of across town from the imperial palace. Beautiful monastery. And then he would kind of rescind the throne of the emperor and go and practice at this beautiful monastery that he built. And then but you can't, like in imperial China, being an emperor isn't a isn't a choice. It's kind of like a divinely dictated role. And so the court would start to worry, and they would start to say, oh, things are looking bad. And then they would go to the emperor and say, we need you to come back and make some decisions. And he would say, well, you need to sort of ransom me back from the monastery. So they would give the monastery a whole bunch of money so that the emperor could walk across town and be the emperor for a little while. And then, after a little while of that, he would walk back across to the monastery and do this over and over again. So eventually there was this Bodhidharma arrived in southern China, and he started to walk around a barbarian. In Chinese culture, the non-Chinese were referred to often as barbarians. They were bigger, and they were hairier, and they were just uncouth and uncivilized. Regardless, really, of where you came from, if it wasn't from China, you were a sort of foreigner and a barbarian. And so this monk started to walk around in the cities of southern China, interacting with senior monks and senior practitioners. And there's many stories, if you're interested, basically where he would, in a few phrases, sort of listen to a senior teacher teaching and just turn it around and basically stick a thumb in the person's eye with the Dharma. Very cutting, very direct, very non-attached sort of Dharma. And so word started to spread that a bodhisattva had arrived in China from the West. Yeah. And eventually the emperor heard about this and said, well, I want to meet the bodhisattva that's come from the West. I've got some questions for him. And so they rounded him up and brought him to the palace. And the meeting is actually, in the Rinzai tradition, the interaction between the Emperor Wu and Bodhidharma is broken down into a number of koans for practice. And it's considered really one of the first mondo recorded. So to sort of set the stage and to really grasp the depth of this, understanding the power of the Emperor of China at this time is really important. It's really life or death. It's really like, if he doesn't like you, he can just have you killed on the spot. So he has this bodhisattva invited, and he comes into the audience with the emperor and his advisor, and the emperor begins to explain how much he loves Buddhism and what he's done. And so he says, I've built this monastery and this monastery and this monastery, and I support this many hundreds or thousands of monks and ensure that they're fed and clothed, and I've sponsored the translations of the whole Tripitaka and all of this kind of stuff. And because he's got this renowned bodhisattva there, he wants to know sort of what the tail of the tape is as far as his practice goes. Because at this time in China, there is a lot of attention being paid to the value of karma and good deeds that benefit the furtherance of the Dharma. In fact, to this day in China, the attitude of creating merit through actions is really very strong. When I went to a sesshin with Red Pine, who has done a lot of translations, one of them being the Zen teachings of Bodhidharma, and he talked about the attitude that to this day in China, if somebody makes a whole lot of money, after first sort of paying off any debts or anything like that, they go to a temple and they invest in a whole, they donate, I say invest because that's the attitude, they donate a whole bunch of money to the temple because it's really looked at as an investment in the next life. So they want to make sure that their next life is also taken care of, so they go and they give money to the temple. And so the emperor is really looking for sort of, how am I doing on this? And, I want to be emperor next time around too. So I'm really looking. So he says, I've done all of these things, and how much merit have I gained? And Bodhidharma responded by saying, none. None whatsoever. This is a reflection of the teaching of the Diamond Sutra, which really indicates there's a formula, I guess, in the Diamond Sutra that says the compassion that is not compassion is true compassion, or the X that is not X is genuine X. And the idea here is that anytime we do a generous act, or we do a compassionate act, or we do a kind and loving act, or a wise act, with the idea that I am doing a wise act or a compassionate act for somebody else, when we really sort of investigate and analyze this, they're not so compassionate. Compassion being the arising or recognition of the fundamental unity of things. The recognition that this person that I'm holding as being outside of myself is not outside of myself. The example I often use is like if you're standing on a bus and an old lady is sort of standing in front of you, and you go around a corner and she starts to keel sideways, you reach out and catch her. There isn't the thought, I'm going to do a compassionate act here. There isn't the thought, oh, I should do a good deed here. If there is, often you'll miss it. And if there's not, it's just one hand reaching out to help the other. There is no acknowledgement of the separation. There's nothing else to do. And there's no thought of self in that picture. It's simply done. The manifestation of compassion. And so when we understand like this, then if I'm doing an act because it's a good act that will generate positive merit, am I doing that act for you or for the person that I'm trying to benefit, or am I doing that for me because it's going to pay off in dividends later? And Bodhidharma is really pointing out that fundamentally the emperor is enmeshed in this idea of separation, subject and object, higher and lower, benefit and no benefit, merit, purity and impurity, all of this. But in our tradition, we really acknowledge and admire Bodhidharma for being able to speak the truth to power, absolute power. None whatsoever. So the emperor was quite perplexed by this response because, he'd been spending a lot of money and a lot of time trying to build up his store of merit. But the emperor wasn't a total fool, and all of the stories of this monk, I think, kept him humble and kept him asking questions. So being confused, he asked Bodhidharma, if this is so, then what is the highest holy truth of Buddhism? What is the real, purpose of Buddhism? And Bodhidharma responded again by saying, vast emptiness. There is nothing holy. Again, the emperor is asking a question which is divided: holy, unholy, pure, impure. Bodhidharma responds in an absolutely radiantly clear way: emptiness. He tells him what the highest holy truth, if you want to call it that, of Buddhism. But it's not holy, it's not special, it's not outside. It is the defining characteristic of all things in the vast cosmos. And because it is the defining characteristic, there isn't anything in this world that is pure or impure, holy or unholy. The emperor at this point, I think, is getting frustrated, trying to grasp smoke. So he asks the monk that's in front of him, well, if this is the case, who are you that stands before me? And Bodhidharma responds, no knowing. When the Buddha was alive, after his awakening, whenever he referred to himself, he used the phrase Tathagata or Tathagata. And this phrase contains two activities. It literally means the one who has thus come, the one who thus goes. So it acknowledges that each of us, there's nothing fixed, there's nothing permanent, there's nothing lasting. This teaching of no self, anatta, that is one of the cornerstones of the Bodhidharma, is being demonstrated just by this term, Tathagata. When I talk about myself, I'm not even going to call it myself. I'm going to talk about what's manifesting right here, what has arrived here but is already departing. Our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions and our physical aspects, all a process collaborating together. Bodhidharma points to this and says, how can I say anything about that? You're asking for me to name something which is fundamentally nameless. And so he calls that out directly. No knowing. And the emperor is flabbergasted, apparently. And in classic Zen style, I've talked about this in koans many times, we have a situation where we've got 3 attempts and we've got 3 strikes. Oh. So Bodhidharma spins on his heel and walks out of the emperor's palace. It said that at that point he left the south, crossed the Yellow River, and went into the north of China. The emperor looked to his attendant, his monk, who was there helping him, sort of with a perplexed look. And the advisor said, "Do you not know who that was?" And the emperor, just, I think, still with his mouth hanging open, shook his head, and the advisor said, "That was the very manifestation of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara." And the emperor made to send people after him to bring him back. And the advisor said, "You could send the whole army, but he'll never come back." So he went to the north and began sitting in a cave, the story goes. And it said that he sat in the cave for 9 years and really didn't attempt to teach or spread the Dharma during that entire time. There are lots of really fantastic... You can make yourself comfortable too, because I'm going to just keep talking for a little while. There's lots of wonderful folk stories that came about from Bodhidharma, and he exists in several cultures that have taken up Zen. Although in many cultures, people don't even know that he has anything to do with Buddhism anymore. The story, if you see his picture, he's always got these big eyes. And in China and in Japan, he is credited with the origination of tea. It said that during his time while he was facing the wall in the cave, he began, and we all know this experience as we sit, Seizan and I know it well after just coming back from Sesshin. During Samu, my work practice was moving about a 1,500-pound rock out of a 1.5 foot deep hole and about 4 feet over. It took 6 days. And then after that, clean up in the warm zendo. You start to... So Bodhidharma got so frustrated with his drowsiness in the cave that the legend says that he cut off his eyelids and cast them into the earth. And from these eyelids grew the first tea plants. And that's why tea keeps you awake. Thanks to Bodhidharma. Wonderful. One of my favorite stories you may recognize it, or it may have some similar qualities, is that actually Bodhidharma, one of the things that I always like to remind people of is that he was kind of an iconoclast. He spoke to power. And one of the things that's often glossed over in the stories of these old Zen ancestors is that people don't like that. And there were many attempts on his life during his time as a practitioner. Generally, the story is that he kind of minded his own business. He hung out in a cave. But a lot of people came to really deeply respect him. And if he spoke, people listened. And if he contradicted what was going on in the monasteries, they didn't like that. And so there were attempts to poison him, and there were attempts to send assassins after him and all kinds of stuff. And I think the story is that eventually he was murdered. And he was buried in a tomb. And the story goes that after his death, there was a monk who was traveling in the mountains of western China. And he ran into an old Indian monk wearing one slipper. And he was headed west. And when he spoke to him, the monk said that his name was Bodhidharma and that he was going back to India. And he thought that was really interesting. And eventually he made his way to the temple at Shaolin, which is near where Bodhidharma's cave is. And he told them that. And they said, "Oh, Bodhidharma is dead and he's in his tomb." But the abbot had disturbed dreams, and so eventually they decided that they were going to roll back the stone and see what was going on. And when they did, they found that the tomb was empty, except for one slipper. There's also a wonderful picture of his passing over the Yellow River. And it's often said that he passed over the river on a single blade of grass. And so you'll often see pictures of Bodhidharma with his beard and his staff, and he's sort of standing on this piece of grass going across the river. In Japan, you'll often see at New Year's time, there is daruma, which is it's like a red doll, and it's got a big beard, and it's usually got two blank white eyes. And the idea is at the beginning of the new year, you paint a pupil on one eyeball, and then you make a wish for the year. And then at the end of the year, or if your wish comes true, you paint the eyeball on, and then you burn the daruma. But that spirit, his spirit, and if you, I've actually given a whole series of talks on the Zen teachings of Bodhidharma, and they're on the podcast. And Red Pine has a wonderful translation of a number of the teachings that are accredited to Bodhidharma. So if you are interested, please read it. He is called the first ancestor of Zen, and is really credited with that style of succinct cutting through. He was asked, "What is Zen?" And his response was, I'm going to sort of give you my own spin on it, was, it is a living transmission which does not rely on scriptures or concepts. It's a direct pointing to the heart and the realization of awakening or Buddhahood. Bodhidharma's teaching emphasizes the realization of our deepest capacities, our original mind, that we are already in possession of everything that we can possibly possess. There is nowhere to go, there is nothing to do, only to realize the vastness of our nature. October 5th is actually a big day in the Zen tradition. It's a change of seasons. Traditionally, it's the day where the priests would put away their summer robes, clean their summer robes and put them away, and take out their winter robes for the change of season. Traditionally, there's a full ceremony, offering of a monk's meal and chanting and all that kind of stuff. So what we'll do is have some snacks and coffee and remember old Bodhidharma, our first ancestor. One of the things I'd like to mention as well is that while I was away on sesshin, a new book came out called Cypress Trees in the Garden. It's written by a fellow named Rick McDaniel, who came here must have been in April of 2013, maybe. And he's written a whole series of books. He wrote a book about the ancestors of Zen in China. He wrote a book about the ancestors of Zen in Japan. He wrote a book about the first wave of Zen teachers that came to North America. And this Cypress Trees in the Garden is about sort of the continuation and some of the teachers who are actively teaching in North America. I mention it because he came here and visited with me for a day, and I get a whole chapter in the book. So Genjo's also the chapter before me in the book. So it's available on Amazon. And from everything I've heard about it, the style of the book is it's really interviews with these teachers, and the author has allowed the teachers to really speak in their own voices. So it's not a retelling. It's actually these teachers expressing their perspective in their own voices. I read an early draft of the interview that I had with him, and I felt, wow, that was really a fair and accurate depiction of the things that I said. So I hope that you'll all run out, maybe in this kinhin you'll fire up your... No, don't do that. And get the book. Mine's already on its way. So thank you all. I'm really glad to be back. Happy. No. Thank you for being with me on this acknowledgement of Bodhidharma Day. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.